It was a seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon. The sun filtered softly through the trees lining our quiet suburban street. Birds chirped, a dog barked in the distance, and neighbors tended to their lawns. I was standing beside my car, inspecting something under the hood, when a piercing scream shattered the calm. My head snapped up. A woman, mid-40s, hair slightly tousled, face red with fury, stormed down the driveway. She held a smartphone tightly, pressed against her ear. Her gestures were wild, accusing, and over the top. "I'm calling 911. You're blocking my driveway. Send someone immediately," she shouted, her voice bouncing off the neighborhood houses. The street seemed to pause. Windows cracked open. Curtains twitched. Porch doors creaked as neighbors leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. I froze for a moment, torn between disbelief and the urge to intervene. My driveway had never been blocked, my car was perfectly parked, and yet here she was, operating under the assumption that the world owed her obedience. I took a slow, deliberate breath and raised my hand slightly. "Ma'am," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, but not aggressive, "this is my property. There's no obstruction." "You're mistaken." She didn't hear me, or perhaps she refused to. Instead, she continued her tirade into the phone, spinning a narrative full of exaggerations, assumptions, and panic. Neighbors began whispering to each other, some discreetly filming, others watching silently, unsure if intervention was necessary. Her performance grew more dramatic by the second. She gestured at my car, leaned forward, yelled at me, and demanded immediate action. Every accusation she made lacked any evidence, yet her confidence made it seem urgent and real. I stood still, composed, letting her energy peak around me, knowing that escalation thrives on reaction, and restraint can disarm the most volatile situations. Minutes passed. Her breathing grew heavy, chest rising and falling rapidly. "This isn't over," she finally yelled, ending her call with a triumphant tone, convinced she had summoned justice. She had no idea she was standing directly in front of someone capable of completely reversing her sense of authority. My hand subtly brushed the badge in my pocket, unseen by her but signaling the calm control that would soon change the entire dynamic. The neighborhood had become a silent witness to a ticking time bomb. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding was about to escalate or collapse in a way she would never forget. Her chest heaved as she lowered the phone, convinced of her imminent victory. "You're in so much trouble," she exclaimed, scanning the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered to witness the drama. Windows were cracked open, porch steps occupied by quiet onlookers. Every eye was on her, drawn in by the spectacle she had created. I remained calm, standing a few feet away from her, hands clearly visible. My tone was steady and unflinching. "Ma'am, this is my driveway. Your claims are unfounded," I said. There was no anger in my voice, only fact, authority, and a subtle hint of patience that only amplified the tension. She ignored me, turning instead to her audience, replaying the drama in her mind as if performing a rehearsed scene. Neighbors whispered and leaned forward, subtly shifting attention toward me. Each gesture I made was measured, confident, and composed. Her exaggerated movements, pointing, gesturing, raising her voice, contrasted sharply with my stillness. She didn't realize that calm, quiet authority can be far more compelling than shouting or theatrics. Every accusation she made fell apart in the presence of someone who understood the rules, knew the law, and remained unshaken by her fury. Minutes stretched. The woman finally ended her call, chest rising and falling rapidly, her phone dangling loosely from her hand. Triumph still lingered in her expression. She believed she had summoned justice, but the foundation of her confidence was about to crumble. I adjusted my stance subtly, letting her energy fill the space around me, while I prepared to reveal something that would instantly change the balance of power. As the neighbors watched silently, I reached into my pocket, touching the badge tucked inside my wallet. It gleamed faintly in the sunlight, subtle, not boastful. The badge carried authority she had never anticipated, a symbol of the real power present in the confrontation. My presence alone had been calm and commanding, but now it would be undeniable. Sirens began in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder. She turned toward them, eyes wide, a smug smile forming. "See? Justice is coming," she said triumphantly. Yet, she had no idea who was about to arrive, or how this moment would shift her perception entirely. The real authority was standing right in front of her, quiet and resolute. The stage was set. The moment she thought she controlled was already slipping from her grasp. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, drawing the attention of every neighbor on the street. Her chest puffed with a false sense of victory. Finally. "They're going to enforce the law," she exclaimed, phone still dangling loosely from her hand. She had no idea that the law she was summoning was about to reveal a truth that would completely shatter her confidence. The patrol car rolled slowly onto the street, lights off, arriving with quiet precision. The officer stepped out, scanning the scene professionally, notebook in hand. Recognition flickered briefly in his eyes as he glanced toward me. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to convey acknowledgement. I remained calm, shoulders squared, eyes steady. She continued shouting, pointing, and gesturing, oblivious to the fact that she had no idea who was standing in front of her. "I'm blocking your driveway," she barked into the phone. "Yes. And he refuses to move." Her voice cracked under the weight of performance, every syllable exaggerated to convince her audience. But her audience had begun shifting silently. Neighbors leaned in, murmuring, their attention gradually moving away from her theatrics toward the truth standing quietly in the driveway. I spoke calmly. "Ma'am, this is my property. The car is parked correctly. There's no obstruction." My words were deliberate, factual, and steady. Each one emphasized control and composure, highlighting the absurdity of her accusations without needing to shout. Her gestures faltered slightly, but pride kept her pushing forward. Then came the pivotal moment. I reached into my pocket and let the badge glint in the sunlight, subtle but unmistakable. Her eyes widened instantly. Jaw dropped. Every ounce of certainty, every shred of confidence she had clung to vanished. She froze mid-gesture, phone slipping from her hand. You're the police chief," she stammered, voice trembling. Her wide eyes darted to the officer, then back to me. The street went silent. Birds seemed to pause mid-flight. Even the neighbors leaned forward, holding their breath. For the first time, she realized that the authority she had tried to summon was standing directly in front of her. Her anger faltered, replaced by disbelief and panic. The spectacle she had so carefully orchestrated was crumbling before her eyes. The tide of control had shifted. The woman who had called 911 believed she commanded the law, but the law, patient, calm, undeniable, was now embodied in me. Every neighbor on the street witnessed the moment her entitlement collided with reality. Her confident stance wavered. Shoulders slumped, eyes wide, the once fierce and angry woman now looked small and vulnerable. I didn't know," she stammered, voice trembling. Her phone dangled uselessly at her side, no longer a weapon but a reminder of her own mistake. The pride and fury that had fueled her earlier actions had completely evaporated. I remained calm, projecting authority without aggression. "Ma'am," I said softly but firmly, "there's no reason to escalate. This is my property, and your claims are unfounded. Let's resolve this respectfully." My tone was measured, not punitive. It was meant to teach, not to humiliate, and the effect was immediate. Her eyes flicked to the neighbors, searching for support, but everyone watched quietly, absorbing the lesson. The officer standing nearby confirmed my position, quietly but decisively. Her jaw dropped further. Every accusation she had made crumbled under the weight of calm, undeniable authority. She blinked, processing the reality. The person she had tried to intimidate was not only in control but carried real power she had underestimated. A hush settled over the street. Neighbors whispered, their attention now on the unfolding correction rather than the chaos she had tried to create. Children peeked from behind curtains, adults nodded subtly, and even passers-by slowed to watch. Her performance, once commanding and theatrical, dissolved in an instant. I'm sorry, she muttered, barely audible, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The words were sincere this time, no longer performative. The phone call, the yelling, the threats all had failed to accomplish anything. The reality was clear: escalation without understanding has consequences. The officer spoke gently, emphasizing responsibility. False calls to emergency services carry serious implications, he said, recording details. She nodded quickly, swallowing her pride. The neighbors absorbed the warning without commentary. The lesson had been delivered through quiet authority and patience, not shouting or confrontation. The street slowly returned to normal. Sunlight cast long shadows across the driveway, illuminating both my car and the space where the confrontation had occurred. What had begun as chaos ended as a clear example of restraint, truth, and the subtle power of authority. For a brief moment, I let the street breathe, taking in the quiet. The lesson had been learned, not through fear or anger, but through calm demonstration of composure and authority. The neighbors would remember it, and so would she. The morning after the confrontation, the neighborhood felt noticeably different. The tension that had dominated the street just a day ago had faded, replaced with a subtle, respectful awareness. Neighbors greeted each other politely, children played freely, and the previously dramatic woman moved cautiously, her phone tucked away and her gestures measured. I stepped outside, surveying the driveway and my parked car. Everything appeared unchanged, yet the dynamic had shifted entirely. Her anger and entitlement, once loud and overwhelming, had been replaced by cautious respect. The neighborhood itself seemed lighter, calmer, as if the events of yesterday had left an invisible mark on everyone's behavior. Reflection brought clarity. The incident had been a perfect illustration of how arrogance and dramatics can escalate unnecessarily, and how patience, calm authority, and restraint can diffuse even the most heated confrontations. I had not shouted, raised my voice, or called for backup. Yet the results were undeniable. Control had shifted quietly but powerfully. Later at the station, I shared the story with colleagues. Every interaction, no matter how small, carries potential consequences, I said. Calm authority paired with patience teaches lessons far more effectively than shouting or aggression ever could. They nodded, appreciating the subtle yet profound impact such an encounter could have on both the individuals involved and the wider community. As the sun climbed higher, I noticed subtle changes across the street. Driveways were respected without incident. Conversations carried more civility. Even casual nods between neighbors now carried unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries and understanding. The ripple effect of calm authority had extended beyond the immediate confrontation. The woman herself had learned humility and awareness. Her dramatic phone calls and exaggerated gestures had given way to careful, measured behavior. She seemed more aware of her surroundings, cautious in her interactions, and mindful of her actions. Even without direct enforcement, her behavior had shifted, a testament to the quiet but lasting power of patience and truth. By the afternoon, the street was nearly back to normal. The driveway and the car remained physically unchanged, but the meaning behind them had evolved. They now symbolized calm authority, integrity, and the power of restraint in resolving conflict. The incident had become a quiet lesson: entitlement and drama are fleeting, but composure, patience, and clarity endure. The neighborhood had absorbed the lesson, the woman had changed, and the power of calm authority had been demonstrated without spectacle. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The street no longer carried the tension that had once dominated it. Driveways were respected, greetings were exchanged more genuinely, and minor disputes were resolved calmly. The woman who had called 911 now approached interactions with caution and awareness, her phone no longer a tool of intimidation. One afternoon, I noticed her tending to her front yard. She paused briefly, glanced toward my driveway, and gave a small, tentative nod. I nodded back. No words were needed. That single gesture spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of the authority and composure she had underestimated. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Where once she had fueled chaos with her theatrics, now she moved deliberately, aware of her surroundings, careful not to provoke conflict. The neighbors had internalized the lesson too, conducting themselves with quiet awareness and respect. Children played freely without worry, adults exchanged smiles, and the street regained a calm energy. At the station, I shared updates with colleagues, not as gossip, but as a teaching example. Authority is most effective when combined with patience, I explained. Escalation feeds itself, but calm, consistent composure diffuses tension and delivers lasting lessons. My team nodded, recognizing the subtle, lasting impact that quiet authority can have. Later, I returned to my driveway. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long, golden shadows across the street. Life appeared ordinary, yet ordinary had transformed. The driveway and car, unchanged physically, now represented calm authority, integrity, and the quiet power of truth. Even the woman who had caused chaos now moved carefully, her actions measured. No confrontation, no shouting, only awareness. The ripple of accountability extended far beyond the initial incident, influencing behavior in subtle, lasting ways. It became clear, true authority doesn't demand spectacle or drama. Its power lies in consistency, patience, and adherence to truth. The neighborhood had internalized this lesson, and life had shifted accordingly. That driveway, once a stage for chaos, now symbolized restraint, respect, and the subtle strength of quiet authority. The street, the neighbors, and even the woman herself had been reshaped by a single moment of composure and clarity. Months had passed, and the neighborhood had fully absorbed the lesson without even realizing it. The energy that once radiated tension and drama had shifted to cautious respect and mindfulness. Minor disputes were now handled calmly, greetings exchanged warmly, and driveways were universally respected. Even the woman who had caused the earlier chaos had transformed, approaching interactions with restraint and awareness. One afternoon, she walked past my driveway. She paused briefly, glanced at me, and offered a small, respectful wave. I nodded in return. No words were exchanged, yet the acknowledgement was clear. A quiet understanding had taken root. The power of authority, once hidden in patience and composure, was now fully recognized. The neighborhood, too, had shifted. Conversations were calmer, interactions more deliberate. Children played in the streets with freedom, and adults exchanged nods and smiles, a subtle acknowledgement of learned boundaries. What had once been a scene of chaos and entitlement had become a living lesson in accountability and restraint. At the station, I shared updates with my team. Authority is most effective when exercised quietly, I explained. It doesn't need to dominate or intimidate. Calm, consistent composure teaches far more than confrontation ever could. They nodded, appreciating the subtle but enduring impact of a measured approach to conflict. Even on the driveway, everything appeared unchanged: my car, the concrete, the familiar suburban surroundings, but the meaning had transformed. The space was no longer a potential battleground but a symbol of integrity, patience, and the quiet enforcement of truth. The woman's behavior had become careful and deliberate. No more phone theatrics, no pointing fingers, no unnecessary confrontation. Observers on the street moved freely, aware of the lessons already absorbed. The subtle authority displayed in a single confrontation had rippled outward, quietly influencing the entire neighborhood. This moment reinforced a fundamental truth: true authority is subtle, consistent, and rooted in fact. Its lessons are enduring because they are observed and internalized rather than shouted. The neighborhood, once captivated by spectacle, now lived the principle of accountability and respect. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden shadows across the street, the impact of that confrontation lingered. Calm authority had prevailed, and the subtle ripple effect had permanently shifted the dynamics of the community. By now, the neighborhood had fully internalized the lesson. The street, once a stage for confrontation, was now calm and orderly. The woman who had called 911 moved carefully, aware of her actions and their potential consequences. Her phone no longer served as a weapon, it remained tucked away, a quiet reminder of past drama. One afternoon, I noticed her working in her yard. She paused, glanced at my driveway, and offered a small, respectful nod. I returned the gesture. No words were needed, mutual understanding had been established. The transformation was subtle, yet undeniable. She had shifted from a belligerent instigator into a mindful neighbor. It was remarkable how perspective can change when pride and theatrics are removed. She had learned the hard way that escalation leads nowhere. Her previous behavior, yelling, calling 911, gesturing wildly, had been ineffective and counterproductive. The street itself seemed lighter, infused with subtle lessons of restraint, authority, and accountability. At the station, I shared the story with colleagues. True authority isn't about dominating or asserting power, I said. It's about patience, clarity, and consistency. When paired with integrity, it teaches lessons that last far longer than shouting ever could. My team nodded, understanding how one well-handled confrontation could ripple through an entire community. That evening, I returned to my driveway. Sunlight bathed the street in warm hues, shadows stretching long across the concrete. Life appeared ordinary, but the ordinary had been transformed. The driveway and the car were unchanged physically, yet their symbolic meaning had evolved. They represented calm authority, patience, and the quiet power of truth. Even the woman who had caused chaos now moved deliberately, aware of boundaries, and careful not to escalate minor conflicts. Her behavior, and the subtle observations of neighbors, created an invisible web of awareness that ensured lasting change. The ripple effect of accountability extended far beyond the initial confrontation. The lesson was clear: escalation is temporary, but integrity and patience endure. Authority exercised quietly and consistently reshapes behavior, often more effectively than confrontation. The neighborhood had absorbed this truth, and life had shifted accordingly. The street was no longer a battleground, but a testament to restraint, composure, and the power of quiet authority. Even months later, the memory of that dramatic day served as a subtle but lasting guide for behavior and respect. By now, the incident had become a quiet legend in the neighborhood. Her dramatic 911 call was no longer a spectacle, it had transformed into a lesson in accountability, patience, and the power of calm authority. The woman who had caused chaos had evolved, approaching every interaction with mindfulness and restraint. One afternoon, she walked past my driveway and offered a small, respectful wave. I nodded in return. No words were necessary. The acknowledgement spoke volumes, a silent understanding that the dynamics had changed permanently. The authority that had once been subtle was now fully recognized, respected, and internalized. The neighborhood itself had transformed. Conversations were calmer, gestures more deliberate, and minor disputes resolved quickly and quietly. Children played without fear, neighbors interacted with subtle awareness, and driveways were universally respected. The ripple effect of one well-handled confrontation had reshaped the community's behavior without any need for force or spectacle. At the station, I recounted the story to colleagues, not as gossip but as a teaching moment. Authority is most effective when exercised with calm and consistency, I explained. Escalation feeds itself, but quiet composure teaches lessons that endure far beyond the immediate moment. My team nodded, appreciating the subtle yet powerful effect of measured action in complex human interactions. Reflecting later in my driveway, I realized how a single confrontation, handled properly, could reshape not only one individual's behavior but an entire community's culture. The driveway and car remained physically unchanged, yet their meaning had transformed. They now symbolized integrity, patience, and the enduring power of truth. The woman who had once embodied entitlement and drama had learned humility and respect. Neighbors had absorbed the lesson silently. Authority exercised thoughtfully had reshaped behavior without confrontation, shouting, or spectacle. The entire street had become a living example of the quiet power of integrity and restraint. What had started as chaos, a misplaced 911 call, and dramatic escalation had ended quietly, with awareness, understanding, and transformation. The most meaningful victories are often invisible, felt in behavior, acknowledgement, and subtle shifts in perception. As the sun set over the suburban street, the lesson lingered in every glance, nod, and quiet interaction. Calm authority had prevailed. The neighborhood had grown wiser, more patient, and more respectful, proof that integrity and composure can turn even the most absurd confrontation into a lasting teaching moment.